Well, once again, good afternoon and welcome to today's show. I'm your host, John Wilcox, teaching the Bible as ancient literature and trying to be of help to those of you who are normally struggling with your Christian faith. It is not supposed to be so easy, all right? Nothing much really happens until you are baptized. And when you are baptized, few people understand what has happened. We've been going over Paul in the book of Romans, which we've been looking at since summertime. I'm only up to chapter 7 at this stage of the game. But Paul has been explaining for the last 3 chapters what happens when you are baptized, that is, dipped in water. The ancient Greek is anastasis, which is resurrection, ana again, and histemi, to stand. And baptized means immersed or dipped. And in ancient times, a baptism, they were more concerned with the results. Linen cloth, for example, was baptized in a purple indigo dye in order to change its color to purple for royalty. And that people were more concerned with what happened after you were baptized than the actual immersion itself. And in Christianity, you are identifying with death and being immersed in water. This is symbolic of being buried because you are dead. You are dying to the law and you are being resurrected, or anastasis. You come up and you stand again, now in newness of life, with the Spirit of the living God, or the Spirit of Jesus imputed. And I went over this a lot in terms of you now possess the Spirit of Jesus in the core of your being, not necessarily in your heart, which is a pump. We know that now. And of course, Paul has been going into depth and detail about now that you are dead to keeping a bunch of rules. What does that mean? Do you get to do anything you want? And of course, the answer is God forbid, no. And we're up to chapter 7 and verse 7. And he is giving a talk now on the law, which is, of course, he's referring to Moses' law, or the Pentateuch, the 5 books that were written by Moses after the children of Israel were released from the captivity of Pharaoh, way back in the beginning. And I want to say this about the law, is that it's important to understand that the law was given. And in all the ancient world, there was nothing at all like it. I liken it to taking a walk in a desert, like I used to live out by in Southern California. Taking a walk in the Mojave Desert, for example, where it's hot, it's barren, there's nothing but Gila monsters and scrub grass, mesquite, cacti, and a few, very tough insects. Okay. And coming across a basketball-sized, perfectly cut diamond of supreme quality, the size of a basketball, and you have to ask yourself, what the heck is this gigantic gem doing here in the midst of all of this barrenness? And that's kind of a good contrast and comparison to Moses' law given by God to the children of Abraham after they had been released from captivity. And everyone had been a slave, remember. You had slavery, and slaves don't think for themselves. They don't manage their lives. They don't do anything except do what they're told for 400 years. None of them knew how to be free. And the law of Moses, I could tell you as a 20th century, 21st century, not as a philosopher, but as someone who's an extremely competent businessman. All this does is it creates a nation that is almost invincible in terms of its economics, its health, its understanding of camaraderie and honesty being a social lubricant that allows for trade and so forth, and also in terms of army and military might. To have the Lord fighting for you because He grants the victory to you because of your obedience. This is a tremendous asset. And it is very much a shame that we used to have The Bible was constantly in the classroom 70, 80 years ago. And, the Ten Commandments were well known. And these are laws that govern over human nature. These are laws that, enable a person to walk freely in life and to have a sense and sensibility about everything. It's too darn bad that we've lost it. Now, Paul is talking about, and he begins in verse 7, where he says, "What then shall we say? Is the law sin?" Because remember, we're freed from it. We're no longer condemned by it. "Certainly not," he says. "On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the law." That's the purpose of the law. It demonstrates to the reader how lacking we are in lawful obedience. "For I would not have known," he uses covetousness, "unless the law had said, 'You shall not covet.'" Now, covetousness is where we desire with a very large and very powerful desire anything that belongs to anybody else. It's someone else's stuff. It's someone else's wife. It's someone else's car. It's someone else's computer. It's someone else's career. It's someone else's bank account. Coveting is this original kind of desire that says, "Hey, what? I gotta have," and it can also be good. Someone who you can covet a career like that. I want very badly to have a career like his career or her career, or I want very badly to have a home the way she has her home, or I want very badly, and there's nothing wrong with coveting per se. It's just when we covet the wrong things for the wrong purposes. Very important and envy, of course, is where this gets worse and worse and worse until finally it's a I have to have that, and I have to get that person to give it to me, or I have to get them out of the way so I can have that. Very powerful human emotion. And he goes on in verse 8, "But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire." And note the first person here. Paul's talking about himself. "For apart from the law, sin was dead." That is, he's going to, next verse he says, "I was alive once without the law." Before the law came, there was no punishment for disobedience to the law. Everything was done without any law, except whatever a king or a pharaoh or an emperor of one of the many empires of the ancient world before Jesus, the Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greco-Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and of course Egypt, the Egyptians in the past. "When I was alive once without the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. And the commandment, which was to bring life, I found to bring death." Now, I mentioned that before at down at the beach with the rocks, about how as soon as you put up a sign that said, "Do not climb on the rocks," hundreds of people in the summer season where the beaches are open and the sun is shining, the water is warm, it's delightful. And those rocks that you saw at the beginning of the program are covered with a green slime algae, very slippery. And I would joke with the lifeguards saying, if we didn't put the signs up, no one would climb on them. They'd all take a look at it and say, "Hey, I don't want to climb on those rocks. Look at that. It's dangerous." But since we put up signs that said, "Please do not climb on the rocks," automatically human nature dictates, "Well, I'm going to go climb." That's how the law works. That's the dynamic that Paul is talking about here. And "For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it killed me. Therefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just and good." Heavenly Father, please take these words of mine, spread them all about, and let each person who is listening gain favor in your eyes and learn wisdom, that indeed laws are good, but they cannot save. The law is terrific at pointing out what's wrong with us, but it cannot rescue you from the wrath of God. It only points out what you must do in order to avoid the wrath of God, which is where Jesus comes in. And of course, Jesus being the substitute, the one who stood in your place and was punished as severely as was allowed under Roman law in the times of the Caesars. Over there in Jerusalem, God's only begotten Son, divinely innocent, guilty of no crime whatsoever, punished as severely as was possible under Roman law to punish the worst of the worst criminals, and finally crucified upon a Roman cross. It's worth noting that of all the hundreds of thousands of slaves crucified under Roman law from a 200, 300-year era, only one name really survives, only one name that we know of now, and that's Jesus of Nazareth. So that was, and then he endured God's wrath while on the cross for about 3 hours, while the wrath of God was poured out upon him, so that you do not have to have it. He is your substitute. When you believe in him and you are baptized in his name, God's wrath is forsaken by him, and he embraces you now as an adopted child. And you have privileges now. You have things that you have benefits that you could not otherwise have. And this is what Paul is talking about. Baptism changes everything. What's happening after baptism is what he's talking about and what the last 4 or 5 episodes of my teaching show have been all about. So further comments coming. Please do exercise your faith. Talk to you soon.